So this is the second part of the theory video talking about the 12 principles of animation. We've just done anticipation and now we're moving on to staging. And staging is about presenting things so that they are incredibly clear, so that you don't need voiceover or dialogue or anything explanatory to tell the audience what's going on. This is a baseball throw taken from the animator's survival kit, and it's very, very clear what's going on here. I didn't need to tell you that this is a baseball throw. We know what's happening here without being told. And this is a key element of animation, is you must stage things clearly. And any live action filmmaker or photographer knows that staging is incredibly clear. What you want to do is tell the story with the image alone. And if you can do that, then you're well on your way to becoming a great animator. The Disney animators learned this really way back in the 20s. Here's Mickey, one of the earliest Mickeys, licking his thumb here, and this is by Ub Iwerks. Again, this is taken from The Illusion of Life, and you can see how clear that Ub has made this this drawing, and the staging is very, very clear, and it's not ambiguous and it's not confusing. Freddie Moore, who is the great Mickey Mouse animator, also understood this. His staging incredibly clear here. Again, this is taken from The Illusion of Life. Here's some images taken from Eric Goldberg's excellent book, Character Animation Crash Course, which I highly recommend. And here, Eric has used, you can see he's got a very, very simple line of action here in his silhouettes. And this is one of the ways of figuring out if your staging is clear, is to kind of squint at your drawing and blur your eyes and see whether the drawing still communicates the idea that you want. So here, Eric has done these drawings, and then below here, you can see he's turned them into silhouettes. And especially with this one here at the end, we know exactly what's going on here, even without the line work in the middle. You can tell just from this character's body language what's going on. So staging is very important, and silhouettes, making silhouettes clear, is an important related concept. Here's a poster that I did for a university ball back in the late 80s, where I did a bunch of dancing dons. Again, I think the silhouettes are strong and it communicates the idea clearly without the need for any explanation. Here's a nice photograph of some people playing volleyball. Again, just the black silhouettes make it clear what's going on in this image. Back to animation, here's a really nice advert done by my dad's studio in Soho Square back in the 1970s. This was an advert for Tic Tac. I think you can see it on YouTube. I love this advert. What's great about it is you've got this incredibly clear silhouette going on here with this woman, and then you see what's going on in his head. And of course, he's got this terrible dilemma because he's got to decide whether to, as he puts it, stick with the broad or go get a new pack of Tic Tac. And I won't spoil the outcome by telling you which one he chooses. So straight ahead animation versus pose to pose animation. What's the difference between the two? This is something that the animators in the 20s and 30s discovered right away, and most animators pretty much work pose to pose animation. That is to say, you start with your key poses. You ask yourself, what's the beginning of the action? What's the end of the action? What's the recovery period at the end? In other words, what are all of the key poses that you need to tell the story? This is taken from The Illusion of Life again. It's Donald trying to hit a baseball with a bat and not succeeding very well. And in animation, we start with key poses, which are the main storytelling drawings, and then you add the breakdown positions, which are the kind of halfway poses in between, and then finally you add the little in-betweens at the end. But there is another way of working, and it's called straight-ahead animation, and it's really what people have to do with stop-frame animation. So, for example, Wallace and Gromit or Chicken Run, that kind of animation. Here, you're forced to animate straight ahead because you've got a clay model, and you have to take a picture one after the next, gradually moving the model forward. So all stop-motion animators, or claymation animators as they're sometimes called, they are all straight-ahead animators, essentially because they have no choice. And I'm sure it teaches you an incredible amount about motion and enforces a really extraordinary discipline on your work. But for most of us in CG, we tend to work pose to pose, for the most part. Now, next concept is drag, follow through, and overlapping action. I remember when I was first starting animation, I found it very confusing. What is the difference between these three concepts? They all really come under the general heading of flexibility. They're all about flexibility. So let me show you the difference between them. Here's Zigzag. He's doing a kind of crazy walk. This is a scene that I animated from the beginning of The Thief and the Cobbler. And this is when Zigzag is marching into the city. And his arms are kind of shooting forward and backwards with a kind of stabbing motion. And as his arm shoots forward, his sleeve kind of drags behind him. So that's the drag action, is the sleeve dragging behind the main action of Zigzag. But as his arm comes to rest, the sleeve will continue moving. It will follow through or overlap the main action. So initially, the sleeve drags behind the motion of the hand, and then it follows through or overlaps the main action of the sleeve. Here's another example. This is Pocahontas, which is a film I also had the great privilege of working on. And the very great Disney animator Glenn Keane animated Pocahontas. He was the lead animator and designed this extraordinary hair that is constantly in motion. Sometimes Pocahontas feels a little bit like an advert for shampoo. But her hair is almost a character in itself, and it is constantly overlapping and following through the main action of Pocahontas. Okay, slow ins and slow outs. These are also sometimes called ease ins and ease outs, and sometimes called cushioning. Basically, it's about physics. Objects need time to speed up and slow down. And this bouncing ball here, as it reaches the top of the arc, it will slow in to the top. Then it starts to ease out again, and then hits the ground, bounces up, and then slows in or eases into the top of the arc, and then slows out or eases out. Or you might say that as it goes to the top of the arc, it cushions into the top of the arc. Basically, it's about physics and about the force of gravity acting on things. So this is easing in and easing out. And the idea is that things don't generally move at a constant rate. You've got gravity and friction applying on them. A ball rolling along the ground will come to rest, and it will ease into its final position, or cushion, or slow in. Here's another concept, arcs, which are also called path of action. Here's a character pointing. Again, this is taken from The Illusion of Life. And what we're really looking for here is the in-between positions following a nice smooth arc as the hand goes through the air. Unlike this version here, where the hand is on a kind of jerky arc or path of action. And one of the great things that Maya does for us is you can go to the animation tools and you can turn on an animation motion trail, which will show you exactly what your paths of action look like. And then you can actually adjust them using the motion trail so that you can smooth out these arcs or paths of action. Generally speaking, you want your arcs and paths of action to be smooth. Secondary action. Here's another principle, and this is really when you've got something going on which is secondary to the main action. Here, the main action of the shot is Medusa talking to the little girl, and the secondary action is her removing her eyelashes. So secondary action is usually something ancillary to the main action that's going on. This is a wonderful scene. If you can find it on YouTube, you should definitely look it up. And you've actually also got some very nice squash and stretch going on Medusa's eyelashes here. Here's another example of secondary action. Here's Zigzag marching into the city. Again, a scene that I animated. And if you watch it very closely, you'll see that Zigzag's toes are kind of unrolling and unfolding like a sort of nasty little snake. They've got this horrid little snake motion, which is actually animated by my father, who went on top of my drawings in this case. And he did the little snake-like motion on the toes. Really nice work there. And it gives Zigzag a kind of creepy feeling. You don't even notice when you're watching it, but you feel it. And so it's a really nice example of secondary action, giving the character a real flavor. Here again, here's Shere Khan, the wonderful Shere Khan, animated by the incredibly talented Milt Kahl, one of the great Disney animators. And he's talking to the snake. That's the main action. And the secondary action is he uncoils his claws, which show his underlying menace and Car's incredible vulnerability. Exaggeration, another principle. This is, if a character's make him sad, make him sadder. If he looks worried, make them look more worried. This is all about exaggerating things, making them broad. Of course, it depends what kind of work you're doing. The more cartoony the work, the more you want to exaggerate. The more realistic the work, the less you want to exaggerate. But still, the principle holds true. You generally speaking want to exaggerate your poses. Now we come on to solid drawing. Solid drawing is, of course, with CG animation, there's not so much drawing involved anymore, but nonetheless, CG animation still involves getting great poses. So nowadays, when we think of a really good drawing, what we really mean is a really great pose. Here's Don Bluth is very, very good on finding nice poses. There's some great videos by the great animator Don Bluth where he talks about how to get really, really nice poses. You can find those on YouTube. Here again, here's an example from Pixar. This is Buzz Lightyear, and again, in this case, this is a lovely drawing. What I mean by that is it's a great pose, but in a way, it's a drawing. It's a drawing in CG. Appeal. Appeal is one of our last principles, and this is really about making things pleasing, making things enjoyable to look at. And ultimately, if your work isn't appealing, you've got nothing worth seeing. And in a way, this is the most important of the principles, because if your stuff doesn't appeal, then in the end, no one really wants to watch it. Here's an example taken from The Illusion of Life again. This is Mickey looking rather wooden. He's rather symmetrical here, rather flat, whereas here he's slightly more in three-quarter view. Overall, this drawing has more appeal than the one on the left. Here's a lovely drawing by Milt Kahl of King Louis, showing lots and lots of appeal. And here's one by me on Scar from The Lion King. This drawing was actually gone over by Andreas Deja, which is why it came out as nicely as it did. But that was a great privilege to be able to work on that film. Here's another example, another principle. This is weight. Getting your work to feel heavy is incredibly difficult. It's a really, really big challenge. Here's some Nordberg thumbnails of a character lifting a heavy weight, and that's one of the things we'll be doing in the course. You've got to make things feel heavy. This woman on the left here, she's carrying this incredibly heavy burden. She's bending over. This chap here on the right, he's just smoking a cigarette. He's not bending over. We know he's not carrying any weight. Again here, the lady on the right, she's carrying a really heavy box of bottles here. This guy on the right, he's not leaning over. We know it's not heavy. Making things feel heavy is a real challenge. It's something we'll come back to over and over again. Here's a box lift or a heavy object lift taken from the Animator's Survival Kit. So, to recap, in summary, timing, spacing, squash and stretch, anticipation, that should be really anticipation, action, and reaction. Staging, straight ahead versus pose to pose, follow through and overlapping action, slow ins and slow outs, arcs or paths of action, secondary action, exaggeration, solid drawing, and appeal. And actually, we have left out one thing, which I think really should be added. So really, it's 14 principles of animation, and that is performance. And I've got a picture of Ken here from the wonderful Toy Story 3. This is one of the most lovely performances I've seen in animation for years. You have to entertain. And that's one of the jobs of all animators, is to create an interesting, entertaining performance. Because ultimately, if you don't make a good performance, no one's going to want to watch it. So there you go. We started with 12 principles. We seem to have ended up with 14. But I think that pretty much covers the basic language of animation.